Background and overview of procurement process. There are rules and procedures that govern public sector tendering. The extent and complexity of the procedure is governed by the value of the goods and services being bought, also known as tender thresholds. Let's look at some typical milestone contract values and the processes that the Welsh public sector organisations must follow. It is important to understand that tender thresholds vary between organisations. Each organisation will have its own financial rules which set out its procurement thresholds. These are often available on the organisation's website or in general tendering guidance issued by the organisation. Generally, for most contracts with a value of £5,000 or less, the buyer is just required to prove that they have obtained value for money, for example through comparison of one or more quotes. The next band, often between £5,000 and £25,000, will require the buyer to issue an RFQ, request for quotation, usually to a minimum of 3 suppliers who will be required to submit a formal response without going through a full tender procedure. The next band will require the buyer to undertake a tender exercise, for example, anything with an overall contract value of £25,000 or over. Any contract with a value above €135,000 must be run as an OJEU tender exercise. The financial thresholds in pounds can vary as the limits are issued in euros, but if you think of £135,000 in euros, you will not be far out. OJEU stands for the Official Journal of the European Union, and for all tenders that come under this directive, strict minimum timescales and other rules become a mandatory part of the process. This is to ensure a fair and consistent approach is being taken. In Wales, the Welsh Government requires all public sector organisations to advertise contracts with a value of £25,000 or over on Sell to Wales. Considerations when finding opportunities. The time and effort needed to put into a fully compliant tender needs to be offset against the chances of winning the bid and how attractive the work is to your business. For example, you need to devote a fair amount of time, resources and effort to get your bid to the right standard, and there is a hidden cost in staff and time to this. If the contract offers security of work for 3 to 4 years, would boost your credibility, has fair on-time payment terms, and means you can further invest in your business, then the hard work at the onset is worth it. PQQ ITT. We have already mentioned the different rules for how tenders have to be managed dependent on the value of the contract. Here you can see the various stages of those rules. The open procedure means anyone can submit a full tender, and the document issued by the buyer will be called the ITT or RFQ. You give a price for the goods and service, but you will also need to prove your capability to deliver on what you promise. When it gets to the OJEU threshold, around the €135,000 mark, there are generally 2 processes that are followed. If it is an open procedure, anyone can submit a full tender. What is key to remember is that you will be provided with a specification of what is required, and you will need to self-assess whether you are in a suitable position to compete for the contract. At this stage, many buyers may instead opt to run what is known as a restricted procedure. This is when the application process is split into 2 parts. The first stage is known as a PQQ, Pre-Qualification Questionnaire. The PQQ is intended to establish all the information about your business and assess your suitability to proceed to the second stage of the process. Only a select few of the highest scoring are invited to the second stage of the process, known as the ITT, the Invitation to Tender. It is worth noting that even in an open procedure, not broken into 2 separate stages, the form itself is likely to contain the questions usually found on a PQQ. Sometimes you may see that a contract tender is being done via competitive dialogue process. This is quite a complex procedure and is only normally used when a buying organisation is not quite certain of the requirements. For example, if a specialist piece of software is needed, the buyer may not know the exact specification and how to develop that software. They will select a few shortlisted bidders who will work with the buyer to develop the exact capabilities and functions of the required software. Once this is done, the full specification is then issued to those shortlisted bidders for them each to cost against the final requirement. There is a typical tender process that you will see followed, so let's look at it now. At the first stage, the buyer will put together a specification describing the goods or services required, the period over which the contract will run, plus any possible contract extension, as well as any other relevant detail to inform suppliers of exactly what they are looking for. The specification is the buyer's wish list, and it is important to show in your tender that you have completely understood what it is they require. At this stage, the buyer will also identify any special terms and conditions to be applied to the contract, in addition to the standard terms and conditions. They will decide how the tender will be evaluated, price only or on a price and quality basis. If choosing to include quality, they decide on the cost-quality ratio, for example, 60% quality, 40% price, and they will identify specific quality criteria and weightings. All this information will be included in the tender so that suppliers understand how their tender is going to be evaluated. The buyer will decide on the type of procurement procedure to follow. If suppliers are to complete a questionnaire to assess their suitability, either a PQQ in a restricted exercise or a questionnaire in an open exercise, then the buyer will identify key questions to be included that address all risks associated with a procurement. In addition to asking for basic information about your company, legal status, company registration, VAT numbers, etc., the questionnaire may include some or all of the following sections: financial capacity and capability, sustainability, equality and diversity, and health and safety. The buyer may also include additional specific questions relating directly to the requirement. The questionnaire will ask you about what you have done in the past and how you did it. It will include questions on things like the number of staff, your experience of delivering projects of a similar nature, insurances you have, and your policies and procedures, etc. We will address this in more detail in Module 3. You will be advised whether responses are for information only, will be pass, fail, or scored. If you are completing a PQQ, then you will need to be advised how many suppliers the buyer is hoping to take to the next stage, the invitation to tender, and what the minimum score threshold will be. Whereas the questionnaire takes an historical look at your company's performance, the invitation to tender looks forwards. It is your opportunity to tell the buyer how you will meet their requirements. Through your responses to the questionnaire, you will hopefully have satisfied the buyer that you are capable of taking on the contract at little or no risk to them. Through your ITT responses, you will be persuading them of your ability to do the job better than anyone else. Sell yourself. If you are an existing supplier and know the buyer well, please remember not to assume, but to take the attitude that the buyer has never heard of your company before. This will help you focus on the quality of your responses. You will need to say how you will deliver the contract, staff that will be involved, and why they are the best people for the job, what your implementation plan will be, how you manage the process, and how you monitor quality and sustainability of the requirement. You will also, of course, be required to provide your cost. Once the ITTs have been submitted, a full evaluation of the responses will be undertaken. This is in accordance with the strict evaluation criteria published in the tender document. On some occasions, this may also include a presentation to the buyer. After the scoring is done, the winning bid will be identified. However, before a contract can be awarded, in all OJEU value contracts, there has to be what is known as a standstill period. All bidders are notified of the intended decision, with details on how they scored. Then there is a 10-day standstill period known as the Alcatel period. This allows any bidder the opportunity to challenge the decision if they believe that there are valid reasons to doubt the decision-making process. If no challenges are lodged, then the contract is officially awarded to the winning bidder. The last stage is feedback from the buyer. It is one of the most important parts of the process, but often overlooked. Make sure that the feedback you receive is meaningful and useful. If the written feedback does not provide enough information, contact the buyer and explain that you would like to know how to improve and refine your response for the next time, and detailed feedback is gratefully received. Even if you win the bid, it is always good to know what it was that gave you the edge, so that you can capitalise on that in future bids.